Hey guys, and welcome back to Mika Reacts and Reviews, where we react and review to things on the internet. And today we're returning to our father in the head, Dr. Jordan Peterson. And he is going to be speaking with Ben Shapiro. And this was uploaded 1 week ago and has almost 500,000 views and almost 40,000 likes. So you guys seem to like my Dr. Jordan Peterson videos, so I would continue because I love listening to Dr. Jordan Peterson, even though I don't agree with everything he says, as well as I don't agree with everything Ben Shapiro says. But we're going to get right into it. And if you like these type of videos, please like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell to get the notifications when I do upload. All of that really helps with the algorithm, guys. And if you'd like to support this channel even further, you can donate. My PayPal link is in the description box below and also in the comment section. It helps, but of course you don't have to. You can just like, comment, and subscribe, and sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. All right, here we go.
Yeah, well, I mean, the gender issue is really an interesting one because one of my professional domains of expertise is individual differences. I'm a personality psychologist, and so I know the gender difference literature. And it's a very solid literature. Well, first of all, it's very solid. It has a 30-year history. Once psychologists got the personality models down, so that would be the Big Five model, all empirically derived, straight statistics, right? Brute force empiricism. Nobody had a theoretical axe to grind with the Big Five except to say, maybe there are human traits, maybe they're encapsulated in language. We can use statistical techniques to find out what they are. That was it. That's the whole ideology. So very, very neutral as far as ideologies go. 5 traits emerge. Okay. Are there differences between the sexes? Turns out there are. All right, they're not massive, although if you sum them across all the traits, you can separate men and women with about 75% accuracy. So it's not trivial, but you have to sum across all the traits. Then another question comes up. Well, are those differences sociocultural or biological? Okay, we can test that. We'll go around the world, we'll look at cultures, we'll rank order them in terms of the gender equality of their sociological policies. We can do that with broad agreement from the right and the left. Then the hypothesis would be, if gender differences decrease among more egalitarian societies, then the gender differences are sociocultural, or at least more sociocultural. That's exactly the opposite of what was found repeatedly. That's pseudoscience. It's like, no, that's mainstream psychology. Those papers have thousands of citations, and right, the average humanities paper has 0 citations, right? And then the next most common one has 1. 3,000, that's an unbelievable classic. And here's the other bit of proof. Like you say, well, how do you know that you can trust someone's judgment about a fact? The fact emerges despite their ideological presuppositions. Okay, so it's well known that the social sciences and the humanities have a left tilt, and a lot of that's temperamental, and the tilt has become more pronounced. But as Jonathan Haidt has pointed out, there are no conservatives among social personality psychologists, or none to speak of.
Very few, yeah.
Very few. Vanishingly few.
Okay, we're gonna stop it there. Also, because my internet just stopped, so we're gonna stop it here and get back into the video. So yeah, there's been a lot of talk about the differences between sexes and genders for a long time, probably since before feminism. But it's definitely been like a hot button topic recently in the last like 4 years, 6 years, especially when the trans community becoming more pronounced and more mainstream and having more platform and voice, and as well as non-binary or gender fluid people or gender non-conforming people coming out more and having a voice about, you know, what their beliefs are and where they stand in society, but as well as third wave feminism kind of coming back with a vengeance, like 4 or 6 years ago. People trying to still prove that there's a gender pay gap because of misogyny and sexism, which may be the case in some situations, instead of just the fact that women just choose different positions and different careers and different lifestyles. That's really hard for a lot of people to swallow, because then I mean, maybe people are scared of the idea of this really rigid idea, like this is what men want and then this is what women want, because then maybe we'll fall back into society of women not having as many choices, because people just feeling like, well, they shouldn't have this choice because this is what they want and this was good for them, so just stick to that, stick to the thing that statistically and what the data says you're good at, and men will just stick to what the data and statistically society says that we're good at, right? Instead of just giving people the choice to do whatever the fuck they want to do. So I think maybe some people are scared of really believing that there are biological differences, but also like I also think that it's the same thing like in black culture, where people don't want to look at the culture, because if you look at the culture then somehow you're blaming the black person. And I think this is the same thing with women. If you look at the studies when it comes to what women choose because of their biological traits, then all their complaints fall back onto them in a way, and not society, and not men, and not the angry, misogynist, patriarchal society that they live in, that, hey, you're making these choices because you're just biologically driven to do so, so it's kind of, the earnest is kind of on you kind of thing. I don't know. So I think that's why people just like fight the idea that there's biological differences. I definitely believe there's biological differences between men and women. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Of course, there's overlap. Dr. Peterson has also talked about in that in other videos, that there is an overlap between genders. So it doesn't mean that we're aliens, amongst each other, that there are women that have more masculine traits and that there are men who have more feminine traits. But he's going by like the generality. Generally speaking, women, tends to go to this, and generally speaking, men tend to go to that. But it doesn't mean that they're not outliers. It doesn't mean that there are other people men that don't like this and women that don't like that. Of course there is, but he's talking about generalities as a whole, right? I'm a woman, and biologically speaking, I fall into some stereotypical feminine things, but I also am a tomboy. I grew up a tomboy. I grew up getting along with boys a lot better and stuff like that. And so in some ways I have a masculine side, but it doesn't mean just because I have a masculine side that all the studies and statistics that prove that women biologically tend to tilt a certain way is all false. I think a lot of people like make the word about them. It's like if someone says like, oh, women tend to want to have babies, right? Or something like that. And if there's women, it's like, well, I don't want to have a baby, so those statistics must be wrong. And it's like, well, no, the world doesn't evolve around you though. Just because you don't want to have a baby doesn't mean a more majority of women do want to have babies. You know what I mean? So people make it about them. If I don't fit that data, if I don't fit the statistics, then it must be wrong. It's like, no, you just don't fit in the generality. You don't fit in the majority. You don't fit in that, and that's fine. But it doesn't mean the majority doesn't exist. Okay, I talked too long. All right, I think my internet is caught up now. Let's continue.
And if the field has a bias, it is definitely and indisputably a left-wing bias. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you have to fight that if you're a scientist, right? Even if you're a left-wing scientist, you have to fight that because you want to get to the facts. It was these social scientists who generated the data that suggested that the gender differences not only were real, but that were bigger in egalitarian societies. They didn't do that to grind their ideological axe, because their ideological presupposition was, no, you make the society egalitarian, men and women get more the same. It's like, nope, they get more different. Oh, isn't that something? And so then there's a corollary there, which is, all right, you could still say, and they're kind of pushing in this direction in Scandinavia, boys and girls are different. Men and women are different. It looks biological. But because people are malleable, you could push the sociocultural structure harder and harder to minimize the biological differences. What? Okay, well, first of all, maybe and maybe not. Maybe you'd get a rebound and they'd get even, like, the kids would rebel. That could easily happen. But let's say, okay, you could. The problem with that is that if you cede that much power to the state, like, you're basically giving the state the right to socialize your kids.
Right.
It's like, you really? Really? You really want to do that? I mean, the people in Israel couldn't do that with the kibbutzes, right? It didn't work. Mm-hmm. So people aren't going to give up their children to the state, and thank God for that.
Well, I mean, this is one of the big questions that we were discussing earlier, is that we were talking about the polarization in politics between right and left. And obviously, you're a psychologist, you're a philosopher, but you've been dragged almost kicking and screaming into this political sphere because everything has been so politicized. And so when you cite social science statistics, and they're scientifically based, you're called a racist, you're called a sexist, you're called a homophobe, and
Called Milo Yiannopoulos.
Exactly. So why is it that why do you think it is that so many folks on the left who purport to be all about reason and science and objective fact are so willing to throw those out the window the minute that it becomes politically inconvenient for them?
Well, before I get to that, before I let him answer, I just want to go back a little bit. So we talked about these Scandinavian countries, or these countries that's more egalitarian, like I guess like Norway or Denmark or something like that. That basically proves like the more equal you made society, actually went drastically different. Men went even more into stereotypical men positions or whatever that's biologically driven, and women did the same. Went into more stereotypical feminine or women positions that are biologically driven, even though the society is very egalitarian, which doesn't mean very equal. And so it kind of just disproves the point that all these biological differences are just social constructs. Are there some social constructs? Of course. Like, I don't necessarily think you're born loving the color pink or something like that. But I still think that girls will still naturally, you know, generally speaking, I wasn't one of those girls. I didn't really like baby dolls. I played with my brother's toys. But generally speaking, girls would gravitate to baby dolls and stuff like that. They did a study with like gorillas or monkeys or orangutans, and they put a bunch of boy toys out and girl toys out. And they're not a part of society. They're in their little gorilla tribe, and the female gorillas naturally gravitated to girl toys or dolls, and the boys naturally gravitated to boy toys like trucks and proceeded to break them or something like that, like boys usually do. And they always trying to say, like, if you really want to understand what our true nature is, you just whittle us back down to our animal heritage or animal instincts or something like that. If you want to really understand people, sometimes you just look back at the animal kingdom, because they don't have a society, they don't have a social construct. They have their tribes, but they don't have magazines and newspapers and universities to influence their thinking. They're just going by off their instincts and what they're biologically driven to do, right? And so that was that study. So yeah, the more you made egalitarian societies, the more men and women went into their biologically driven places, right? Generally speaking, doesn't mean that every woman and every man, right? And then talking about how a lot of the humanitarians and the literature and arts in university is very, very heavily driven by left-wing ideology, because majority of the professors and the teachers have a heavily left-wing belief system. Some of them are Marxist or communist or socialism. And so because of that, there is no balance to this education that a lot of these children in universities are receiving. And that's why a lot of people feel like they're just being indoctrinated, because they don't have a diversity of thinking, especially if they're in humanitarians. But even if you hear some students now, even when it comes to science or mathematics or robotics or something like that, they're still trying to squeeze sort of social justice beliefs into all of those fields. And again, there's no rebuttal, there's no balance, because most of them are very heavily left-wing, and so they're going to teach you their ideology and their beliefs, and they're going to give you the literature that leans to make their ideology and beliefs more believable. Even when it comes to, like Ben Shapiro just asked Dr. Peterson, you cite statistics and data, so why can people say that you're racist or misogynist or transphobic when, like he said, this data has been around for 30 years, it hasn't been argued, it is well documented of the biological differences between men and women, generally speaking. So why can people say that? Because in universities today, they're now trying to say science and math is racist, because, you know, historically speaking, it was all done by white men, and they're coming from their perspective as misogynist, racist, and controlling the patriarchy. So that's why a lot of people will just dismiss the data, because they'll say, like, well, it wasn't done by a diverse group of people from different backgrounds and whatever, so we can just dismiss this as just, you know, right-wing bias or whatever. But if we don't have data, then all we have is anecdotal stories and people's feelings and lived experiences, and we cannot create policies and create school programs to teach our children based off of feelings and anecdotal stories and stuff like that, right? Anyway, let's get back into it.
Because you imagine that a cognitive system, so an interpretation of the world, has levels. They're axiomatic levels. Some fundamental presuppositions are more fundamental than others. And you could say, well, the leftists, historically, maybe because of their atheistic rationality, are more on the side of science than, say, the fundamentalists of any sort. But when push comes to shove, you find out how the axioms are nested. There's deeper axioms underneath that, which is that all hierarchies are based on power, and all power plays are based on group identity, tribal identity, essentially. And that the entire history of the world is nothing but a power play between these different identity groups. It's like, okay, well, if the science indicates that some of that's wrong, then do you alter those beliefs or do you alter the science? And the answer to that question is, well, it depends on how you've hierarchically arranged those. If the science is at the bottom, then you alter your beliefs, right? If the scientific facts are the axiomatic substructure, then you alter your beliefs. If your beliefs are the axiomatic substructure, then you alter the science. Well, we've seen how that plays out. And one of the things I've tried to do, so to speak, is to diagnose the axiomatic structure. It's like, okay, what's the metaphysical presumption structure of the radical left? Well, what it is you're basically your group. Your groups are basically engaged in warfare, right? And the warfare is arbitrary, except insofar as it serves your group. Okay, I don't buy any of that. I think that's a route to certain disaster. I think it's a degeneration into tribalism, and that we will seriously pay for it. Not only because it returns us to tribalism and tribes fight, as the anthropological evidence for that is overwhelming, right? Tribes fight. It doesn't even matter if they're chimpanzee tribes. Even chimpanzee tribes fight. So not only do you regress to a tribalism, but you also invalidate the one proposition that's been able to help us arise above the tribal, which is the idea that the individual should be sovereign. And so I think the culture war is about what's the proper framework within which to view human identity, and what's the relationship between the individual and the group in relationship to that identity. And the leftist answer is, it's all group and it's all power. It's like, okay.
Did you know that every like on this video creates...
All right, that was Dr. Peterson, Why Men and Women Are Different, speaking on the whole group and identity thing. A lot of conservatives, libertarians, moderates are individualists, and if you look at the statistics and studies around people who consider themselves individualists, it's actually quite fascinating, and why a lot of us kind of think similarly versus people who are very left and very progressive tend to be tribalist, meaning they group themselves together, everything's group, everything's tribal, group think, group ideology, group identity. You know, that's why all white men are a part of the patriarchy, misogyny. All white men, all our men control the world instead of just the elite, just the 1%, right? All black people are oppressed. You know, it's because they just see it as a group thing. They don't see you as an individual, and an individual identity and wants and beliefs are less important than a group, even though at the same time they kind of they seem like they want every tiny little identity to matter, so it kind of goes against the group things, like, you know, whatever. Even though I've said in my Joe Rogan video that I like community, but it's different from tribal. In tribal, I feel like individual identity is almost like discouraged, where in communities, your individual identity is still embraced and still respected. Your rights and your property, your rights and your privacy and your property rights and your own safety, what you want is still important within the community, where tribal is like, no, it's about the group, it's about the tribe. Which I'm not a big fan of at all. And then talking about science. So like a lot of people talk about how like they feel like the sides switched, like like liberal isn't the same thing as what liberal meant 10, 15 years ago. And the same thing with conservative. So they kind of switch sides, and like a lot of progressives now act like the religious fear-mongering parents that used to exist in when I was in like middle school or high school, where it's like they would freak out about Gossip Girls and like try to get it banned and try to get words censored and cuss words censored and sex scenes censored, where now the left is trying to censor everything and free speech is not a thing anymore, where freedom is is more like a conservative belief, and safety is more of a liberal belief, where it used to be like the other way around. And maybe it never was, but that's how people saw it. So a lot of people feel like the sides switch, right? The progressives acts like the more religious, sort of cult-minded people, and the right is more the punk now. They're the more going against the narrative. Like, we don't want to do what you say, we're going to live how we want to live kind of thing. And that used to be switched. Anyway, my point is, that's taking me a long time to get to, was that the whole science thing. Like, church people were considered the anti-science. Like, oh, you guys believe in, you know, magic and a magic guy in the sky, and you believe in prayer and all that stuff. And the left was more like science, right? And I do still think a lot of religious people can be anti-science. But now it's kind of like, especially with the Rona situation, it's like, the left is like worships like Dr. Fauci, while the right is like something that right here. And so it's kind of done a switch again, where it's like, even though when it comes to sex and gender, the left will say like, oh, it's all misogyny and it's about the part of the patriarchy and whatever. But when it comes to the Rona situation, science is the Lord and Savior of everything. So they go back and forth, which is not abnormal for progressives or people who are really hardcore on the left. A lot of their values and their standards switch in one wave depending on what situation it is or who's involved. Free speech matters then when they want to speak, but free speech doesn't matter when Ben Shapiro wants to speak. You know what I mean? It just tends to wobble wherever they think it's necessary. But at the same time, I think the Rona situation and all the stuff that's coming out now has also proven to us, like Dr. Peterson has said, that the science can be influenced by ideology, and we've kind of seen that. So I think that science is starting to like kind of not be as higher up on a hierarchy to a lot of people who are kind of seeing that maybe the science can be influenced depending on which narrative is in power, I guess. Anyway, that's enough. I'm done. Tell me guys, what do you think of this video, what Dr. Troy Peterson said, or what I've said? Let me know in the comment section below. Like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell to get the notifications when I do upload. All of that really does help with the algorithm, guys. And if you'd like to support the channel even further, you can donate. My PayPal me link is in the description box below and also in the comment section. It really does help, guys, but of course you don't have to. You can just like, comment, and subscribe. I also have a second travel vlog channel. I travel as a lifestyle, so if you'd like to know where I am in the world, you can go to the description box below and also in the comment section. Hit the link, go subscribe to my travel vlog channel, and or follow me on Instagram. My stories is usually what's most up to date, and you guys have an amazing day. Bye!